She came by the repair shop just after lunch, the air still thick with the smell of oil and hot metal. Most people step into a place like that and frown at the noise, the grit, the mess of it all. But she stood there in the doorway like she had all the time in the world, one hand resting lightly on the frame, her eyes scanning the space before they landed on me. Elena from next door. She introduced herself, though everyone on the street already knew her. She ran the little bookstore 2 shops down, the one I'd walked past 100 times but never walked into. She needed help, she said, something with the fuse box in the back that kept tripping. Her voice was calm, steady, like asking a neighbor for sugar, except not. I wiped my hands on a rag, suddenly too aware of the grease under my nails. Yeah, sure. I can take a look. The walkover was short, but my chest felt unreasonably tight, like I'd forgotten how to breathe in a normal rhythm. She didn't say much, but when she did, I caught myself listening harder than I should have. Not just to the words, to the slight hesitation before she spoke, like she was always editing herself mid-thought. Her bookstore was cooler, dimmer than the blinding daylight outside. The shelves leaned with the weight of stories, the faint scent of paper and dust carrying something gentler. She pointed me toward the back, explaining the problem in clipped phrases, though I noticed her hands, resting on the counter, tapping once, twice, and then stilling as if she'd caught herself revealing too much. The fuse box was easy enough, a loose connection, nothing I couldn't handle. But I worked slower than I needed to, every so often glancing back at where she stood. She wasn't watching me directly. She was pretending to sort through a pile of receipts, her brow furrowed, lips pressed tight. Yet every few moments, our eyes caught in the half-light, and both of us looked away too quickly. "You're good with your hands," she said finally, almost offhand, but her voice betrayed her, just a hair softer, just a fraction longer on the last word. My throat dried. I coughed, nodding, trying to answer without sounding like a kid caught staring. "Guess I've had enough practice." Silence lingered after that, not uncomfortable exactly, but charged, like the air before a storm, waiting for something to break it. When the lights flickered back on, she smiled, small, almost private, but enough to shift the entire room. She thanked me, twice, as if once wasn't sufficient. And when I handed back the rag I'd carried in from the shop, her fingers brushed mine. Just lightly. By accident. Or maybe not. The touch barely lasted a second, but it was longer in my head. A static spark I didn't know how to shake off. I left before she could say anything else, or maybe before I could. The street outside felt louder, harsher, like I'd stepped out of one world into another. I walked back to the shop with my hands shoved deep in my pockets, trying to think about the cars waiting, the noise of the radio inside. Anything except the fact that my neighbor's hand had found mine for that brief, impossible heartbeat. And still, all afternoon, no matter what I did, I couldn't stop replaying that smile in the dim light of her bookstore. She came back the next evening, carrying a box that looked heavier than she wanted to admit. I was locking up the shop, keys already in my hand, when she slowed in front of me. "Could used another set of arms," Elena said, not quite meeting my eyes. Her smile was polite, practiced, like the kind you give strangers who hold open a door. I took the box without argument, surprised by how light it was once in my grip. "Books, of course. Always books." She led the way to the store, her steps brisk, as if efficiency could erase the fact that she'd asked me for help twice now. Inside, the place was dim again. She liked the lighting low, the corners soft with shadow. She gestured toward the counter. "You can just set it there." I did, but lingered, brushing dust off my palms. She started pulling the books out one by one, stacking them with care. Her movements were precise, almost delicate. I noticed the way her fingers lingered over the spines, as though each title carried a weight she didn't want to let go of. "You do all this alone?" I asked before I could stop myself. Her laugh came out short, thin. "It's just a store." Not exactly heavy lifting. But there was something tired in her shoulders, in the way she straightened a little too slowly. The kind of exhaustion people don't say out loud. I wanted to ask more, but she was already moving on, flipping through receipts again like the night before. That wall of hers, invisible but impenetrable, came back up fast. So I watched quietly, taking in details she probably didn't mean to give away. The faint lines at the corners of her mouth when she frowned. The way she tucked her hair behind her ear, almost impatiently. There was a moment, brief, but enough, when she rested her hand flat on the counter and let out a breath she didn't think I'd hear. Not a sigh exactly. More like something she'd been holding in too long. "You okay?" I asked, keeping my tone light, but my chest beat harder than it should have. She looked up sharply, then softened. "I'm fine. Just a long day." The smile that followed was too quick, too practiced. But I caught the hesitation in her eyes before it settled in place. Like she wasn't fine at all. We fell into silence, neither of us sure what came next. I should have left then. The job was done, the box moved. But something kept me rooted, like the air itself didn't want to let me go. She reached for another book, and for a second her sleeve slipped back, exposing her wrist, pale, delicate, a faint mark along the bone. My hand twitched without meaning to, like it wanted to steady hers. I didn't. I stayed still. But when she finally looked at me again, her eyes lingered half a second longer than before. Long enough to leave me standing there, wondering if she knew I'd noticed more than I was supposed to. The rain started just as I was closing the shop. Sheets of it, hammering the tin roof, so loud I could barely hear myself think. I almost made a run for my apartment upstairs, but then I saw her light still on. The bookstore's front window glowed faintly against the storm, and before I thought twice, I was crossing the wet pavement, pulling my jacket tighter. She let me in with a half-surprised smile. "Power's out on half the block," she said, holding up a small lamp that flickered on batteries. Her hair was loose, damp at the edges, like she'd braved the rain earlier. I offered to wait with her until the storm passed, and she didn't say yes, but she didn't send me away either. We sat across from each other at the counter, the only light between us a dim amber circle. It should have been ordinary, neighbors waiting out bad weather. But in the quiet, every sound magnified. The rain pounding, the low hum of the lamp, her fingers drumming lightly on the wood. My eyes betrayed me, tracing the curve of her hand, the way her nails tapped once, then stilled. She broke the silence. "Funny, I don't usually let people see me like this. At night, the store feels different after hours." Her voice was softer than before, almost confessional. Something in me leaned forward, like I could catch the words before they slipped away. "What do you mean?" I asked. Her eyes flicked toward the rows of shelves, shadows stretching long. "During the day, I can be busy. Keep moving. At night, it's harder to not think." She stopped herself there, biting down gently on the edge of her lip. I should have let it go, but the air between us pushed me further. "Not think about what?" She laughed, not loud, not joyful. A thin, nervous laugh that cut off quickly. "You ask too many questions, Daniel." The way she said my name, soft, careful, pulled at something inside me I couldn't untangle. I wanted to push, to stay in that opening, but the phone behind the counter rang sharp and sudden. She stiffened, reaching for it before the second ring. Her tone shifted when she answered. Low, flat, like she was somewhere else entirely. A man's voice rumbled faintly through the receiver, though I couldn't make out the words. She said little. "Yes. No, it's fine. I'll handle it." When she hung up, her hands lingered on the phone longer than necessary. She didn't look at me right away. When she finally did, her expression was careful again, shutters drawn. "I should lock up soon," she murmured, though she made no move to stand. I nodded, though I didn't move either. The storm still raged outside, but the real noise was in my chest. For a second, neither of us looked away. The space between us felt too small, too charged. My hand shifted on the counter, almost bridging the gap toward hers. Almost, until she glanced down, breaking the moment before it could cross that invisible line. And yet, even as I pulled back, I knew I'd felt it. Something waiting, something neither of us could name, hovering just out of reach. I told myself I wouldn't go back to her store so soon, that I'd give it a few days, let the pull fade. But 2 nights later, I found myself there anyway, standing under the warm buzz of her sign, staring at the closed door. She must have seen me through the window, because she opened it before I knocked. Her expression wasn't surprised this time. It was something quieter, something like she'd been expecting me. Inside, the shop was still and low-lit, the kind of silence that presses against your skin. She poured tea without asking, set the mug in front of me, then sat across with her own. The steam curled upward, filling the space between us. We didn't touch. We didn't need to. The silence itself had weight. Finally, she looked up and said, "What are we doing?" The words dropped like a stone. Not accusing, not pleading, just heavy with the kind of truth you can't sidestep. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. I wanted to tell her I didn't know, that I hadn't planned any of this, that all I meant to do was fix a fuse, carry a box, and somehow I was here now. Unable to stop thinking about the way her eyes lingered when the world went quiet. Instead, I said, "I don't think I've figured that out yet." Her lips pressed into a thin line. She exhaled slowly, folding her arms, then unfolding them. A restless motion, like she wanted to shield herself but couldn't bear the distance it created. "This isn't," she cut herself off, shook her head. "You're younger. I should know better." Her voice faltered on should, the crack almost imperceptible, but enough. I leaned forward, elbows on the table, holding her gaze because it felt worse to look away. "You keep saying what it shouldn't be," I said quietly. "But what if it already is something?" She blinked, as if my words caught her off guard. For a moment, her mask slipped. I saw weariness, regret, and something else tangled beneath it. A longing she hadn't meant to show. She rubbed her temples. "I can't be careless anymore. I've lived long enough to know how that ends." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It pulsed with everything neither of us dared to say. I watched the faint tremor in her hands as she gripped the mug, the way her eyes stayed fixed on mine a heartbeat too long before darting away. I wanted to close the distance, to reach out, but I stayed where I was. Restraint pressed harder than desire. Finally, she whispered, so softly I almost missed it, "Don't make me feel like I still have choices." The words carved through me, raw and final, leaving the air so charged I couldn't breathe. She kept the store lights dim, the door half closed with a handwritten sign that read back in 15, though no one believed it. I walked past more times than I'll admit, telling myself I wasn't looking for her, until one evening I found the door unlocked, the store empty. "Elena," I called softly. Her voice floated from the back. "Here." She was sitting on the floor behind the counter, knees drawn up, papers scattered around her. For the first time since I'd met her, she looked undone. Her hair loose, glasses slipping down, a shoe kicked off to the side. In her hands was a small envelope, the edges worn as if it had been opened too many times. I hesitated at the doorway, unsure if she wanted company. But then she glanced up, and the look on her face, tired, unguarded, made the choice for me. I sat down opposite her, the counter between us. "You ever keep something you shouldn't?" she asked suddenly, holding the envelope but not opening it. I thought about lying, about giving some simple answer. But the truth slipped out quieter than I expected. All the time, her lips twitched into something that wasn't quite a smile. She slid the envelope across the counter. I didn't take it, but I saw the handwriting on the front. A man's name. Short. Faded. "My husband," she said, almost casually, but her voice betrayed her. "Ex-husband, I should say. He used to send me letters, even when we were already unraveling." She laughed faintly, though there was no humor in it. "Funny, isn't it? He could never say what he felt in person, but he could write it down when I wasn't around to hear." I didn't know what to say, so I said nothing. The rain outside, light this time, just a drizzle, filled the silence for us. Finally, she looked at me directly. Her eyes were sharper now, searching. "You remind me of him. Not the man he became. The one he was before everything went wrong." The words landed heavier than she probably intended. I shifted, heat rising in my chest, though I couldn't tell if it was shame or something else. "I'm not him," I said carefully. "I know." Her voice broke slightly on the second word. The room seemed smaller then, the shelves leaning in, the dim light pressing us closer. She set the envelope down with trembling fingers and pushed it aside like she couldn't bear to touch it anymore. Neither of us moved. The air between us carried too much unsaid. Her ghosts, my longing, that fragile thread neither of us dared pull. And then she whispered, barely audible. "Don't let me look for him in you." It was soft, but it split something open inside me all the same. I almost didn't go back after her words. "Don't let me look for him in you." They should have been a boundary, a wall. But instead they followed me everywhere, clinging to the corners of my thoughts until resisting felt more like pretending. When I finally did return, she didn't look surprised. Tired, maybe. Resigned, but in a way that seemed to accept what we'd both been circling around. The shop was closed, the lights low. She sat by the front window with a cup of tea, watching the street like it might offer answers. I didn't knock. She'd left the door unlatched, as though she knew I'd come. We didn't speak at first. I sat across from her, the small table between us holding nothing but her half-empty cup. The silence was thick, but not sharp anymore. Softer. "Finally," she said, "I shouldn't keep leaning on you." I shook my head. Maybe it's not leaning. Maybe it's just being here. Her lips parted, like she wanted to argue, but the words never came. She looked down instead, fingers tracing the rim of her cup, circling slowly. Her hands shook, just slightly, and I wanted to reach across the table. But I waited. The quiet stretched, filling with everything we hadn't said. Then she whispered, "I don't know how to start over anymore." The vulnerability in her voice hollowed me out. I leaned forward, searching her face in the dim glow. "Maybe you don't have to. Maybe it's not starting over. Maybe it's just starting from here." Her eyes lifted, locking with mine. And there, in that stillness, the tension finally broke. Not with declarations, not with desperate confessions, but with something gentler. She reached across the table first. Not a sudden move, just the slow, deliberate slide of her hand over wood until it rested near mine. I didn't hesitate this time. I laid my palm over hers, the warmth immediate, grounding. Neither of us said anything. We didn't need to. Her breathing slowed, mine steadied. The street outside carried on, headlights streaking past, faint voices in the distance. But inside, there was only this quiet understanding. She leaned in slightly, enough that our foreheads almost touched, then paused there, eyes closed. It wasn't a kiss. It wasn't even a promise. It was something more fragile, permission to stay. We sat like that for a long while, saying nothing, just breathing in the same small space. And when she finally whispered, "Don't go yet," it wasn't a plea. It was an acceptance. So I stayed. It wasn't the first time I saw her, standing in the doorway of my shop with a fuse that needed fixing. It wasn't the storm that pressed us into silence, or the envelope she couldn't quite let go of. It wasn't even the night her hand finally found mine across the table. It was all of it. A slow unraveling. A quiet accumulation of moments that bent the distance between us until it no longer existed. I used to think love came like a strike of lightning, loud, certain, impossible to mistake. With her, it came in the pauses, in the words unsaid, in the way she stared too long before catching herself, and in the way I couldn't stop noticing the tired curve of her shoulders, the tremor in her laugh. She taught me that love isn't always about beginnings. Sometimes it's about learning to live inside the cracks, about finding steadiness in the middle of all the broken places. I don't know what we are, not in a way that fits neat definitions. But I know that the bookstore doesn't feel dim anymore when I walk inside. I know she doesn't sit alone with her letters as often. And I know I've stopped waiting for permission to care. Maybe that's enough. Maybe that's everything. What I do know is this. Love didn't arrive for me in grand gestures or flawless timing. It came in the quiet, in her whispered, "Don't go yet," in the silence that finally felt like home. And if I had to start again, I wouldn't choose lightning. I'd choose this. Every time. Sparkles, if this story made you feel something, let me know in the comments. Would you want more stories like this?